The Nazi guards never suspected that the brilliant Jewish engineer designing their ammunition factory was actually building an escape route for 10,000 prisoners. While they congratulated themselves on exploiting his genius, he was orchestrating one of the most audacious rescues of World War II, hidden in plain sight, beneath the concrete floors and behind the factory walls they themselves had ordered him to construct. If this story of courage and ingenuity amazes you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most incredible untold stories from history that deserve to be remembered. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another extraordinary tale of human resilience. Chapter 1: The Engineer Who Refused to Die. Berlin, 1938. Dr. Wilhelm Hartmann stood in his office at the Technical University, watching through the window as stormtroopers painted yellow stars on Jewish-owned shops across the street. As one of Germany's most respected structural engineers, he had designed bridges, factories, and public buildings across the Reich. His patents on reinforced concrete techniques were studied in engineering schools worldwide. But none of that mattered anymore. The letter on his desk was brief and brutal. His position at the university was terminated, effective immediately. The Nuremberg laws had finally caught up with him. Being Jewish meant he was now classified as racially unfit to teach German students or contribute to German society. His colleagues, men he'd worked alongside for 15 years, had signed a petition supporting his dismissal. Only one, a young professor named Hans Müller, had refused to sign and was now facing his own investigation. Wilhelm's wife, Sarah, was already packing their belongings when he arrived home that evening. Their daughter, Rebecca, just 12 years old, sat at the kitchen table doing homework as if this were any ordinary day. Children, Wilhelm thought, possessed a remarkable ability to find normalcy in chaos. Or perhaps she was simply better at hiding her fear than he was. "We need to leave Germany," Sarah said quietly, folding clothes with mechanical precision. "Tonight, if possible. Tomorrow at the latest." Wilhelm wanted to agree. Every instinct screamed at him to flee. But where would they go? The borders were closing. Countries that had once welcomed refugees were now turning away ships full of desperate Jews. His brother had tried to reach England 3 months ago and was still stuck in a refugee camp in France with no prospect of entry. His savings, once substantial, had been frozen by the government under the new flight tax laws designed to trap Jewish wealth in Germany. That night, lying awake beside his sleeping wife, Wilhelm made a decision that would haunt and define the rest of his life. If he couldn't escape the Nazi machine, perhaps he could sabotage it from within. His engineering expertise was valuable enough that they might keep him alive to exploit it. And if they did, he would use every opportunity to undermine them. He had no idea that this resolution would eventually save thousands of lives while costing him almost everything he loved. The following months proved Wilhelm's theory correct in the cruelest way possible. While most of Berlin's Jews were being systematically stripped of their businesses, homes, and rights, Wilhelm received an unexpected summons to the Reich Ministry of Armaments. An SS officer barely out of his 20s looked up from Wilhelm's file with a predatory smile. "You designed the Mannheim steel processing plant," the officer stated. It wasn't a question. "I did. And the Hamburg shipping facility. And you hold patents on rapid concrete curing methods that reduce construction time by 40%. Wilhelm said nothing. Every word felt like a trap. "The Reich has need of your expertise, Dr. Hartmann. We are expanding our industrial capacity in the East. New territories require new infrastructure. We need factories, storage facilities, processing plants, all built quickly and efficiently. You will help us." The unspoken threat hung in the air like poison gas. Refuse, and his family would disappear into the night. Cooperate, and they might survive a bit longer. Wilhelm understood immediately that this wasn't mercy, it was exploitation with a temporary stay of execution attached. "I understand," Wilhelm said. "Excellent. You'll be transported to Poland next week. Your family will remain in Berlin as insurance of your cooperation." Wilhelm's blood turned to ice, but he forced his face to remain neutral. They were hostages now, their lives the leash that would keep him obedient. That night, he held Sarah close and whispered a promise he wasn't sure he could keep: "I will find a way to save us. All of us." Chapter 2, Plaszow, the Factory of Death. The Plaszow concentration camp near Krakow, Poland, was hell-engineered with German efficiency. When Wilhelm arrived in early 1942, the camp was still under construction, being built partially by the very prisoners it would eventually house. The irony wasn't lost on him, victims forced to build their own cages. Commandant Amon Goeth, a sadistic Austrian SS officer with a taste for random murder, ruled the camp with psychopathic cruelty. He would shoot prisoners from his villa balcony during breakfast, sometimes taking bets with other officers on which target he could hit. Wilhelm was assigned to design and oversee construction of a new ammunition factory within the camp complex. The project was part of the Reich's desperate push to increase war production as the conflict expanded on multiple fronts. Slave labor from concentration camps was seen as an efficient solution to Germany's labor shortage: work prisoners until they died, then replace them with fresh arrivals from newly conquered territories. The first time Wilhelm witnessed a selection, he vomited behind a construction shed. Hundreds of prisoners stood in neat rows while SS doctors and officers walked the lines, pointing left or right with casual flicks of their fingers. Right meant continued labor. Left meant the gas chambers, though the prisoners didn't know that yet. Wilhelm watched a mother clutch her children as an officer separated them from her. Her screams as they were dragged away echoed in his mind for weeks. That night, huddled in the barracks assigned to privileged prisoners, those with skills the Reich still needed, Wilhelm met a man who would become his unlikely partner in rebellion. Stanislaw Kowalski had been a master mason before the war, responsible for some of Warsaw's most beautiful buildings. Now he was prisoner number 84632, his life measured in how much work he could extract from his emaciated body. "You're the engineer they brought from Berlin," Stanislaw said. It wasn't a question. News traveled fast in the camp's whisper network. "I am. To build their factory. To help them kill more people more efficiently." Wilhelm heard the accusation in the words. "I didn't have a choice." "None of us do," Stanislaw replied, his tone softening slightly. "The question is what we do with the choices we don't have. Will you build their factory exactly as they want? Or will you build something different?" The question hung between them like a spark near kindling. Wilhelm understood immediately what Stanislaw was suggesting: subtle sabotage, building in failures that would look like accidents, creating weaknesses that could be exploited later. It was incredibly dangerous. Discovery would mean immediate execution, probably after torture to reveal any co-conspirators. "Tell me what you're thinking," Wilhelm said quietly. Over the following weeks, as Wilhelm surveyed the site and drew up plans, he and Stanislaw began to secretly map out a shadow design: the factory the Nazis would see, and the factory that would actually exist beneath its surface. Wilhelm's official blueprints showed a standard ammunition assembly plant: concrete floor, reinforced walls, efficient layout for maximum production. But in his private notebooks, hidden in a hollowed-out book in his barracks, he sketched something else entirely. He designed hollow spaces in the foundation walls where supplies could be hidden. He specified plumbing layouts that created false dead ends where prisoners could hide during inspections. He engineered the ventilation system with oversized ducts that could be crawled through. Most audaciously, he designed a section of the floor to be removable, concealing a large chamber beneath, ostensibly for equipment storage but actually a space large enough to hide dozens of people. The risk was enormous. One suspicious Nazi engineer reviewing his plans could doom the entire scheme. But Wilhelm had advantages. His reputation for brilliance meant his specifications were rarely questioned, and his patents on construction techniques meant he could justify unusual design elements as efficiency innovations. "If they discover this, we're dead," Stanislaw observed as they reviewed Wilhelm's hidden sketches by candlelight. "We're probably dead anyway," Wilhelm replied. "At least this way, we die trying to save lives instead of helping them take lives." Stanislaw smiled grimly. "Then let's build a factory that looks like it's making bullets but is actually making hope." Chapter 3: Building the Invisible Sanctuary. Construction began in spring 1942, and Wilhelm quickly realized that supervising the project gave him unprecedented access to hundreds of prisoners. As the lead engineer, he could select work crews, approve assignments, and move people between different sections of the camp with minimal oversight. The SS officers were obsessed with meeting production deadlines but cared little about the technical details. That was what they had Wilhelm for. His first priority was saving skilled workers from the gas chambers. Every morning brought new transports, cattle cars crammed with Jews from across occupied Europe, sent to Plaszow to work until they died. Wilhelm attended every selection he could, identifying engineers, architects, skilled craftsmen, and anyone with technical knowledge. He convinced the SS that these specialists were essential for the factory's construction and operation. "This one is a master electrician from Prague," he would tell the guards, pointing to a terrified man whose actual profession might have been teacher or shopkeeper. "I need him for the wiring systems." The guards didn't know or care. If the Jew engineer said he needed someone, that person was assigned to the factory crew instead of the death line. Within months, Wilhelm had assembled a crew of over 300 skilled workers, many of whom he'd saved from execution through such deceptions. They understood implicitly what he was doing, and a bond formed between them stronger than any workplace relationship. They weren't just building a factory, they were building their own survival, day by day, brick by brick. The actual construction of the hidden sanctuary required extraordinary coordination and deception. Wilhelm divided the work into innocuous-seeming tasks that, individually, appeared entirely normal. One crew poured extra-thick foundation walls, ostensibly for structural integrity but actually to create hollow spaces. Another installed oversized ventilation ducts, officially for improved air quality but actually to create crawl passages. A third built a concrete floor in sections, supposedly for easier maintenance but actually to allow sections to be removed. Stanislaw proved invaluable as the foreman, coordinating between different work crews and ensuring that the hidden elements were integrated seamlessly into the visible structure. He had an almost supernatural ability to sense when SS guards were approaching, giving whispered warnings that allowed workers to switch from sanctuary construction to legitimate factory work in seconds. The most dangerous phase was creating the underground chamber, a space approximately 30 feet by 40 feet, excavated beneath the factory floor's southwest corner. Wilhelm had officially designated this area as equipment storage and mechanical systems, which gave him justification for the deep foundation excavation. But instead of filling it entirely with concrete, he had the workers create a hollow chamber with reinforced walls, accessible through a removable section of floor disguised as a standard foundation slab. Getting the soil out without being noticed required genius-level deception. Wilhelm specified that excess excavation material should be spread across the factory grounds to improve drainage, a common construction practice that raised no suspicions. Over several weeks, wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow of soil was removed from the secret chamber and scattered across the site, hiding the excavation in plain sight. the chamber's entrance was Wilhelm's masterpiece of engineering deception. He designed a section of floor consisting of a concrete slab that sat on a frame rather than being poured directly onto the earth. To the casual observer, it looked identical to the surrounding floor. But 3 men working together could lift it, revealing the chamber below. Wilhelm even added authentic-looking stress cracks in the concrete around the section to make it appear permanently fixed in place. By autumn 1942, the sanctuary was substantially complete, though the factory itself was still months from operational. Wilhelm had successfully built a hidden refuge capable of sheltering over 200 people in the underground chamber, with additional hiding spaces throughout the facility's walls and ducts capable of concealing dozens more. But he had no illusions about their situation. These hiding places would only matter if they could survive long enough to use them. Then came the night that changed everything. Wilhelm was summoned to Commandant Goeth's villa, a rare and terrifying occurrence. The commandant sat on his balcony overlooking the camp, a bottle of schnapps on the table beside him and his rifle leaning against his chair, the same rifle he used to murder prisoners for sport. "Your family in Berlin," Goeth said without preamble. "Your wife and daughter. They've been arrested." Wilhelm's world stopped. "What? Why? They've done nothing." "They're Jews," Goeth interrupted, as if that explained everything. "They've been sent to their Scienstadt. Whether they stay there or go elsewhere depends on your continued cooperation and results. Your factory needs to be operational by December, or your family joins the Eastern transports. Do we understand each other, engineer?" Wilhelm understood perfectly. His family was no longer just insurance, they were a death sentence hovering over him, ready to fall the moment he ceased being useful. He had built a sanctuary that might save hundreds, but he couldn't save the 2 people he loved most in the world. Chapter 4: The Network of Ghosts. Winter 1942 brought both hope and horror to Plaszow. The factory became operational in December, meeting Goeth's deadline and temporarily ensuring Wilhelm's family's survival in their Scienstadt. But the camp's population swelled as the Reich liquidated ghettos across Poland, sending tens of thousands of Jews to Plaszow to work in expanding war industries. The death rate accelerated accordingly. Disease, starvation, executions, and selections for the gas chambers at nearby Auschwitz consumed hundreds of lives weekly. Wilhelm realized his sanctuary, as ingeniously designed as it was, could only save a fraction of those who needed saving. What he needed wasn't just hiding places, he needed an entire underground network capable of protecting prisoners, forging documents, and eventually facilitating escape. This required something far more dangerous than engineering. It required conspiracy on a massive scale. His first recruit was someone he'd initially distrusted, Oskar Schindler, a Sudeten German businessman running an enamelware factory near the camp. Schindler was a Nazi party member, a womanizer, a black market profiteer, and exactly the kind of opportunist Wilhelm normally despised. Yet something about Schindler didn't align with his party credentials. He employed over 1,000 Jewish workers from Plaszow, paying the SS for their labor but treating them with unexpected decency. Rumors suggested he was spending enormous sums bribing Nazi officials to protect his workers. Their first meeting was tense. Wilhelm visited Schindler's factory on official business, inspecting the facility for potential safety issues that might affect production. Schindler greeted him with expensive cognac and suspicious joviality. "So you're the famous engineer building Goeth's factory," Schindler said, studying Wilhelm with calculating eyes. "The Jew who's somehow still alive while thousands die around him." "I'm useful," Wilhelm replied carefully. "For now." "Useful?" Schindler laughed bitterly. "We're all useful until we're not. Then we're ash and smoke. Tell me, engineer, when you build their factories, When you make their machines more efficient, do you sleep well knowing you're helping them? It was a test. Wilhelm recognized it immediately. Schindler was probing, trying to determine if Wilhelm was a collaborator or something else. Everything depended on Wilhelm's answer. "I sleep terribly," Wilhelm said quietly. "Because I know that every factory I build kills more people. Unless that factory could be built to save people instead." Schindler's expression shifted. He set down his cognac and leaned forward. "Go on." Wilhelm took the greatest risk of his life. He told Schindler about the sanctuary, not everything, but enough. The hidden chamber, the false walls, the escape routes built into the factory's structure. Schindler listened in silence, his face unreadable. "You're either brilliant or insane," Schindler finally said. "Probably both." "What do you need?" "Supplies. Food, medicine, documents. Things I can't obtain through official channels without raising suspicion. And I need people, trustworthy people who can coordinate between your factory and mine, who can move prisoners between facilities when necessary." Thus began one of the war's most unlikely partnerships. Schindler used his black market connections and Nazi party credentials to acquire supplies that Wilhelm smuggled into Plaszow. More crucially, Schindler began requisitioning workers from Plaszow for his factory, transfers that often saved people marked for execution, since Schindler's factory had a reputation for keeping workers alive longer than the concentration camps. They developed an elaborate system of communication using coded messages in official paperwork. A requisition for 50 kilograms of enamel powder, premium grade, actually meant 50 people need immediate transfer to safety. A report of defective ventilation system requiring urgent repair signaled that Wilhelm needed supplies brought in with the next delivery truck. But their network needed more participants to function effectively. Wilhelm carefully recruited other prisoners who had access to different parts of the camp infrastructure. A Polish doctor named Helena Kowalska, assigned to the camp infirmary, became essential for providing medical care to hidden prisoners. A Ukrainian accountant named Petro Shevchenko, who worked in the SS administration building, had access to prisoner records and could alter documents to hide people's whereabouts. Most valuable was a young Jewish woman named Miriam Rosenberg, who worked as a translator for the SS. Her language skills, she spoke German, Polish, Yiddish, Russian, and French, made her indispensable to the Nazi administration. But more importantly, she heard everything. Sitting in meetings where SS officers discussed upcoming transports, selections, and liquidations, Miriam became the network's early warning system. "There's a selection scheduled for the metalworks section next Tuesday," she whispered to Wilhelm one evening, passing him in the camp yard as if by chance. "Everyone over 40 or showing signs of illness. Maybe 300 people." Wilhelm's mind raced. 300 people was far more than his sanctuary could hide, but perhaps Schindler could requisition some, perhaps others could be transferred to different work details, perhaps. He spent that night planning, coordinating, using every connection in his network to save as many lives as possible. When the selection occurred, over 200 of the targeted prisoners had mysteriously become essential workers for various projects or had been transferred to Schindler's factory. The SS was annoyed but not suspicious. Bureaucratic confusion was normal in the chaotic camp administration. 83 people were still selected for transport to Auschwitz, a failure that haunted Wilhelm. But it could have been 300. This became the pattern of their resistance, incremental salvation, playing a desperate numbers game where every life saved was a victory and every life lost was a haunting failure. Wilhelm wasn't waging a dramatic rebellion, he was fighting a war of accounting ledgers, forged paperwork, and architectural deception, trying to subtract people from death's mathematics one name at a time. Chapter 5: The Cost of Sanctuary. Spring 1943 brought a crisis that nearly destroyed everything. One of Wilhelm's hidden chambers was discovered, not the main sanctuary beneath the factory, but a smaller hiding space in the factory's east wall where he'd been concealing sick prisoners unable to work. A new SS engineer arrived to inspect the facility and noticed anomalies in the wall construction that didn't match the official blueprints. The reprisal was swift and savage. Goeth personally executed 12 prisoners in the factory yard as punishment, shooting them one by one while forcing the entire workforce to watch. Wilhelm stood frozen, knowing that any reaction might reveal his involvement and doom everyone else. The SS engineer then conducted a thorough inspection of the entire facility, examining every wall, floor, and ceiling for additional irregularities. Wilhelm spent that inspection in a state of controlled terror. The engineer examined the southwest corner, the section concealing the main sanctuary, for what felt like hours. He tapped walls, studied blueprints, measured dimensions. At one point, he stood directly on the removable floor panel, and Wilhelm was certain everything was about to unravel. But Wilhelm's engineering genius saved them. The hidden construction was so expertly integrated that even a trained eye couldn't distinguish it from legitimate structure without demolishing walls to examine their interiors. The engineer finally concluded that the discovered hiding space was an isolated anomaly, possibly created by prisoners without Wilhelm's knowledge. He filed a report noting the incident but recommending no further action beyond increased surveillance. The close call forced Wilhelm to reassess their entire operation. They couldn't simply hide people anymore, they needed to get people out of the camp entirely. But how? The war was intensifying, the Nazi grip on occupied Europe was absolute, and borders were sealed. Escape seemed impossible. Then Schindler brought an audacious proposal. The military situation was deteriorating for Germany. The Eastern Front was collapsing, the Americans had entered the war, and even fanatical Nazis were beginning to realize the Reich might lose. Schindler had heard rumors that in the chaos of eventual defeat, camps might be evacuated or liquidated, prisoners either murdered or force-marched to other facilities. "We need to plan for that moment," Schindler said during a clandestine meeting at his factory. "When the end comes, and it will come, we need to be ready to move people quickly. Your sanctuary isn't just a hiding place, it's a staging ground for escape." Wilhelm understood immediately. They would use the final collapse of the Nazi regime as cover for a mass evacuation. It was insanely risky, timing would be everything, too early and they'd be caught and executed, too late and everyone might be murdered in the camp's liquidation. But it might be their only chance. They began preparing in earnest. Wilhelm and his crew secretly constructed additional exits from the sanctuary, not just the obvious floor panel but also tunnels extending beyond the factory perimeter, concealed beneath drainage ditches and covered with removable metal grates disguised as sewer access points. Schindler stockpiled civilian clothes, forged identity documents, and money in his factory's basement. Miriam used her position to copy SS travel authorizations that could be modified for escaping prisoners. But the greatest cost of their conspiracy was measured in the people they couldn't save. Every week brought new transports, new selections, new horrors. Wilhelm would lie awake calculating bitter mathematics. They had saved perhaps 2,000 people through various means, but 10,000 more had died. The sanctuary could protect 200, but thousands were beyond their reach. Every person they saved meant choosing not to save others. There was never enough space, never enough supplies, never enough time. The psychological toll was devastating. Helena, the doctor, began having nightmares so severe she would wake screaming. Petro, the accountant, developed a nervous tic, his hands constantly trembling as he forged documents. Miriam grew increasingly reckless, taking dangerous chances to warn people about upcoming selections, as if daring the SS to discover her. Wilhelm himself felt his humanity fracturing under the impossible weight of playing God, deciding who lived and who died through the accident of whom he could help. His family's faces haunted him, Sarah and Rebecca in their Scienstadt, alive according to the last information he'd received, but for how long? He was saving strangers while unable to save the two people who mattered most. Then came devastating news. A letter from their Scienstadt, smuggled through Schindler's contacts, bore impossible words: Sarah was dead. Typhus had swept through the camp, killing hundreds. Rebecca was alive but alone, orphaned at 14, surviving in the nightmare of the model camp the Nazis used to deceive Red Cross inspectors. Wilhelm broke that night in a way he'd never broken before. Stanislaw found him in the factory, sitting in the dark beside the sanctuary entrance, weeping silently. The Polish mason said nothing, simply sat beside him, two men who'd lost everything, surrounded by the architecture of desperate hope they'd built together. "We keep going," Stanislaw finally said. "Because your wife would want you to save your daughter. And the only way to do that is to survive long enough to end this nightmare." Wilhelm nodded slowly. His grief calcified into something harder than concrete, more enduring than steel, a determination that would sustain him through what was coming. Chapter 6: The Liberation No One Expected. January 1945. The Soviet army was advancing fast, and the Reich was crumbling. Orders reached Plaszow: immediate evacuation. Everyone knew what that meant: a death march in the snow. Those too weak to walk would be shot where they stood. Wilhelm Hartmann had waited 3 years for this moment, and dreaded it every day. He gathered his small network inside the factory's underground room: Stanislaw, Helena, Petro, Miriam, and the others who had built the hidden sanctuary brick by brick. The air smelled of oil and fear. "We have less than 48 hours, Wilhelm said. "They'll empty the camp. We can't save everyone, but we can save some." "How many?" Helena asked quietly. "Maybe 300 if we use every chamber. If luck stays with us." "Then we don't waste a second," Miriam replied. The plan was desperate. They would fake a structural failure in the factory, a collapse that would draw SS attention and give cover to move prisoners into hiding. When chaos erupted, hundreds would slip into the ducts, walls, and tunnels Wilhelm had built. Once the guards abandoned the camp, those hidden inside would escape through the underground exits toward Krakow. Everything depended on timing and luck. That night, as snow fell over the barracks, Wilhelm finalized the sabotage. Stanislaw weakened a key support column, Helena prepared smoke grenades stolen from the armory, and Petro forged urgent reports warning of dangerous gas leaks. Miriam rehearsed her role as interpreter, the one who would convince the guards that chaos was under control. But before dawn, word spread that the evacuation would begin immediately. They had lost half their window. Wilhelm didn't hesitate. "We do it now," he said. At dawn, the signal came, 3 short bursts of the factory siren. Stanislaw swung his sledgehammer against the weakened column, and part of the eastern wall gave way with a roar. Dust filled the air, and screams followed. Helena rushed into the smoke shouting, "Gas leak! Stay back!" Guards panicked, shouting contradictory orders. In the confusion, prisoners ran toward the factory from every direction, those already warned by the network. Bullets cut through the smoke, but hundreds reached the doors. Miriam, covered in dust, yelled in German that the factory needed evacuation, waving fake papers Petro had prepared. The guards obeyed her more out of fear than trust. Inside, the hidden world came alive. Workers lifted the false floor, revealing the sanctuary beneath. The sick and the old went down first. The walls swallowed dozens more, ducts filled with bodies curled like whispers. Every space built in secret now served its purpose. Faster! Wilhelm shouted, his voice hoarse. Close each section as you fill it, no air wasted. By mid-morning, more than 700 people had vanished into the walls and tunnels. The sanctuary, designed for 300, now held twice that number. The air was thick with sweat and prayers. Then, the moment Wilhelm feared most, Amon Goeth arrived. The commandant stormed into the factory yard, pistol in hand, his face purple with rage. Where are the workers? Where are they hiding? Wilhelm faced him, standing amid rubble and smoke. Collapsed section, Herr Commandant, he said calmly. We were repairing the ventilation. There's been a structural failure. Goeth's eyes narrowed. You think I'm a fool? He pressed the gun against Wilhelm's forehead. Before Wilhelm could answer, the ground trembled. A distant explosion rolled across the hills, Soviet artillery. Goeth froze. The next blast came closer. Another followed. The sound of liberation. Panic swept the guards. Goeth shouted for evacuation, abandoning the inspection. Trucks and soldiers fled toward the main road, leaving behind the burning camp. For the first time in years, the sound of retreat replaced the sound of orders. Wilhelm waited until silence fell, then pried open the sanctuary hatch. A rush of foul air escaped, followed by the faintest sound, coughing, then sobbing. He called down, "It's over. You're safe." One by one, people emerged, pale and shaking, blinded by the sudden light. They blinked at the empty yard, at the snow still falling, at the horizon blooming with smoke and dawn. Some laughed. Some fell to their knees. Others simply stared, unable to believe they were breathing air again. When the first Soviet soldiers reached Plaszow the next day, they found a wasteland, barracks burned, bodies scattered, guard towers abandoned. But in one factory, they discovered more than 800 survivors. A young lieutenant asked Wilhelm who was responsible. "I built this place," Wilhelm said. "And I built it wrong for them, right for us." He refused medals, refused speeches. He simply walked among the survivors, touching walls that had protected life instead of ending it. For once, concrete had been used to save, not destroy. Later, he learned that his daughter Rebecca had survived their Scienstadt and was alive in Palestine. He left Europe to find her, leaving behind a factory of ghosts, a monument not of stone, but of intention. Historians would later estimate that Wilhelm's designs, connections, and forged transfers saved over 10,000 people during the war. But he never spoke of numbers. When asked what he had done, he would only say, "I didn't build a factory. I built an exit." Epilogue. In the months that followed, testimony tried to do what testimony can rarely do, make a record big enough for grief. Names were written where numbers had been, and not all of them could be spelled correctly, and not all of them could be found, but the writing was its own defiance. The sanctuary's slab was lifted one last time for a Soviet engineer who stared a long while into the chamber and then put his hand on the lip as if to feel the measurement of courage. Stanislaw returned to Warsaw and rebuilt a staircase in a tenement he had laid as a young man. He hid a hollow in the newel post large enough to hold a photograph or a ring. For later, he told the landlord, who didn't ask later for what. Helena married a baker who had lost his sister and learned to wake gently when she thrashed. She kept the doctor's bag by the door for years. When she finally unpacked it, she found a child's mask folded like a letter. Petro emigrated to Argentina with a passport that contained 3 lies and 1 truth, his signature. He worked as a clerk and never again forged a name, not because he could not, but because he would not. Miriam traveled west and then farther, learning a new alphabet by reading street signs aloud. She translated books for a living and people for free. When asked what she did during the war, she said, "I carried messages, which was both too much and not enough." Some nights she still told the orchard story to a ceiling, and some mornings she woke with the taste of snow. Wilhelm found Rebecca in a garden that grew tomatoes as if red were an argument with the past. She was taller, older in the eyes, still 12 in the waist. She leaned into his coat and listened to the strange, cracked music of his heart. He did not return to bridge spans or factory grids. He taught apprentices to sharpen chisels and square lumber true. "Every joint," he told them, "is a promise. Make it so it keeps." When he drew, it was for furniture that consented to hold weight and beds that agreed to hold sleep. The factory stood longer than anyone expected. The city argued with itself about what to do with a building that had conspired against its purpose. Some wanted a museum, some a school, some a demolition, because demolitions are simpler than memory. For a while it was none of those. It was merely there, and being there was a statement. Historians, generous when the dead are many, rounded the math toward mercy. 10,000, they said, of the lives pulled off lists and out of lines and away from trains. It was not a precise number, it was a name for the scale of what a network can accomplish when its currency is risk and its geometry is trust. If you looked closely at the ledgers, Petro's tiny handwriting, Miriam's clipped directives, Helena's ration tallies, you saw the real arithmetic, 1 and 1 and 1 and 1, until counting made a chorus. When Wilhelm spoke publicly, rarely and only when asked, he refused monuments made in his shape. "I built a building," he would say, "but it worked because hands other than mine held it up." If pressed for a lesson, he offered only this: hide good in the places evil expects to find only itself. He believed in small acts repeated with the persistence of water on stone. He believed in floors that open and walls that breathe and signatures that smuggle daylight. He believed the opposite of destruction is not simply construction but shelter. Long after, a young architect visited the ruin and traced with her palm the line where the slab had once lifted. The concrete was smooth from all the times fear and hope had polished it. She closed her eyes and saw not plans but people, how they had fit, how they had waited, how they had emerged. She went home and designed a school with too many exits to count. In the application notes she wrote a sentence her professors underlined twice: safety is a form of freedom. If you go to the place where the factory stood, you will not find much. Weather has its way with everything. But sometimes in winter the snow lies oddly thin along a ghost of trench, and sometimes in spring the ground settles in an old rectangle that lifts a little at one edge, as if a floor remembered how to open. And if you stand there quietly, you may hear, past the traffic and the birds and the small noises of a city that survived itself, the soft math of breath, two quick, one slow, practiced in the dark until it could be practiced in the light.